And Dave, I invite you as well to participate in this. So this is actually kind of going after some dirty laundry a little bit. So obviously guiding executives during growth periods, your various roles, you're either giving direction on people growth, on hires, on investments. This audience member wanted to know, have you ever made a real bad mistake and what did you learn from it?
And we're recording this?
I guess less than a specific example. When you're dealing with hyper growth and scale, you have to be comfortable calling it on an executive. So I'd probably start there. Like with the pace of growth, the beauty of learning and development in my mind is it takes time. There's a seeding to that, but if the floor of the work is growing so fast, you're not going to train your way out of that. So I think you have to be willing to look at that very clearly and be honest on whether or not that executive can match your scale. Maybe different in a mature company or one that's not at that growth rate where you could take a different turn to that. And I think the biggest mistake I constantly hear, and I've seen myself, is not calling it fast enough. If you see that, and leaning in when you know that person can't scale to where you're going. Yeah. Doing the respect to that person of telling them that, helping them find a place where they can rock it, and be clear on that. And you'll hear CEO after CEO say, I didn't move fast enough, I didn't move fast enough. So challenge yourself on that before you fall into the trap of, I know I can train this person to where I want to go, especially in hyper growth. You've got to be critical because time will kill you.
That's a great lesson learned. Who wants to take the next?
I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So my perspective is based on previous companies I've been with, where, and this is particularly true for founder, organizations that are still being run by the founder, and that's making sure that the founder realizes it's no longer their story, that it's not about them, and it's about ego in large part. I've been with a couple companies where the CEO founder really felt it was their story, and in the end didn't care whether that story was a failure or not. It was more important that their story lived on beyond them. And it really does need to shift at some point to being, it does need to be about, founders early on, but it needs to shift to being about the whole company, and it's no longer something that any individual owns of the organization. And I think it's an easy thing to fall into for folks that are new into leadership roles as founders.
Yeah, for me it's really personal. I would say, it's the big failure, the big mistake for me was, finding myself at one point in time in a role in an organization that really wasn't the right fit. And so as a result, what it meant was I wasn't as effective as I could have been or should have been. I just wasn't able to sort of give that frank, solid, really good advice until I was walking out the door. And then I learned that is what I should have been. I should have had the courage to do that all along, right? It may have worked, but it was just deeply personal for me when I made my mistakes.
My own example, it's an easy one. When I think about things I've done well and poorly, the biggest thing I screwed up in the past was actually an individual who was, again, you're growing fast. You have more things to do than there are hours in the day. And I had a person who was in a senior role on my team who was technically fantastic. The person also, tended to be a screamer at other people on the team, was a miserable person to work for. And you end up creating a very toxic environment. And so I think sometimes when you're growing so fast, you're too tolerant of people who don't play nice with others. And frankly, the best thing I ever did was make a change because it sort of relieved so much pressure and allowed people to really enjoy coming to work every day. And it really changed the whole environment. So you got a lot more productivity out of the entire team. People didn't live in fear. And that was, for me, a life lesson that great performers and playing nice with others aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. You really have to have both or things just don't work.
That's great.
Yes.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm probably the only person on the panel who has never made a mistake.
And we're out.
So full of myself. No, the one that I can definitely, and I've honestly made a lot of mistakes in my career, but one that I think has been, which I got mentored upon earlier in my life, is always saying yes and not saying no. And it's really hard to say no, especially to executive leadership, but taking that step back and having the courage to say no and say not yet, or maybe in a future date, that's been a big lesson.
That's great. So guys, that was wonderful. We're going to have to call it just to get people back at work on time. But ladies and gentlemen, please, thank you.
Thank you.
Great panelists, fantastic. And thank you guys. You guys steered the show, and so I appreciate that is the true spirit of these sessions. So I appreciate people raising their hands and guiding some of the Q&A. That was wonderful. Feel free to stick around. There is technically time left for people to network, ask questions of the panelists before they escape. Maybe some food and drink on the outside, and stay as long as you need
gotta
to.
run, yeah.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. You guys are amazing. You guys are amazing.